Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you. We've got New York Times bestselling author James Rollins with us. James, welcome back.
Thank you very much, George. I love being on your program.
You've got another bestseller here coming.
I hope so. I'm excited to get this book out on the shelf. This book has been sitting in the publisher's chair for about, a year. So it's very anxious to get that out there into readers' hands.
Great times. When you were last with me last year, we were talking about your book, Kingdom of Bones. And you write novels, but they're based on things that could be real, aren't they?
I mean, to me, one of the greatest compliments I get as a writer, I want people to be turning the pages late into the night. I want that popcorn entertainment. But, what I love to hear when I hear from a reader says, hey, Jim, I enjoyed your book. But at the end of your book, you have this what's true, what's not section where I sort of pull aside the curtain and I'm going to tell you where the information came from. And they said, hey, I was really interested in this topic, and so I did some further research, and it was really interesting. So to me, that's one of the great joys of being a writer is not just to have that thrill, but also maybe to pass on something that excites me, hopefully will excite those readership out there.
Good for you. Give us an overview of Tides of Fire.
I describe this book as a disaster movie in novel format. In your introduction, you mentioned that I sort of leaned back into my Jules Verne, Doc Savage era. I got this idea decades ago. I saw a movie when I was a boy. It was Krakatoa East of Java.
Aha.
I don't know if you remember this. It was 1968, starring Maximilian Schell and Brian Keith. It's a disaster film that sort of dramatizes the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. And that movie stuck with me. I keep thinking about that even decades later. So I wanted to try to capture that type of that excitement that movie generated in me as a kid. So the story is a story of volcanic eruptions, island swamping, tsunamis, earth-shattering quakes. But the story itself starts when a deep-water research station off the coast of Australia discovers a sort of a strange bioluminescent coral in an otherwise dead sea. And it's a species that just defies science. Yet it seems like this species might hold the key to saving the oceans around the world. But before any investigation to occur, some masked assailants attack the station. The incursion sets in motion a devastating chain of events that turns the oceans toxic, corrupts coastline, threatens all life with a danger like no other. And it's up to my hero, Sigma Force, to get in there and try to figure out what's going on. There's a key buried in the past that's tied to Aboriginal mythology. And what Sigma discovers is even more frightening. It's something lost for millennia, something that could shake the very foundations of humanity, and weirdly enough, it's based on fact.
This is your 17th novel?
It is. 17, the Sigma series. It's my 44th novel in total.
And explain the Sigma Force for us.
Well, they're a team of former Special Forces soldiers that were drummed out of the service for various reasons, but because of special aptitudes or abilities, they're secretly recruited by DARPA, the Defense Department's Research and Development Agency, and they're retrained in various scientific disciplines to act as field agents for DARPA. I just basically say they're scientists with guns, shorthand it.
When I was looking at your book, James, which just came out, as a matter of fact, didn't it?
Came out today.
Perfect timing. I was thinking of that tragedy in Maui where they have found 99 people dead already, and they've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, that is just tragic. I mean, I being in Lahaina, I ate at a restaurant overlooking Lahaina's bay there, and I can't believe that there was that level of destruction. It's just shocking.
It's gone. I mean, it's just obliterated.
What I find fascinating when I was doing further research on that topic, actually, is that one of the concerns they have on why that occurred was the fact that there's these invasive species. There's non-native plants that were being grown in that area that just can't handle that level of weather, and that's probably those types of plants that are the trigger for the degree of destruction that happened.
Your story takes place aboard an international research station, which is undersea. Tell us about that.
Well, again, I love as a scientist to try to think of what things might be like. I try to stick to reality and the limitations of such an enterprise. So I consulted marine biologists, I talked to oil rig engineers, shipbuilders, even companies that manufacture deep-sea submersibles. So I wanted to create as accurate pictures as possible. Like, for example, the leading sort of research ship of my novel is called the Titan X. It's basically based on a real ship called the Earth 300, and that ship is going to be basically sailing our seas in the year 2025. It's a huge yacht. They call it a giga yacht, which I think is a cool word. Basically, it's a huge ship, and at the stern of the ship, they have a 13-story glass sphere that sits in the stern and basically has 22 state-of-the-art labs. They're all housed in this giant orb city, or it's called Science City. And I decided, that's a cool ship. I'm going to take it for a test drive.
How realistic, James, are the things that are in the novel could happen to us here?
Again, if you read my book, you think that can't possibly be real. But everything there's a lot of military tech that you're going to see in this book. Because one of the major adversaries is the Chinese Navy comes to look for a submarine that they lost in that area. But everything in that book that you're going to read is real. It's based on real ships, either in use today or that are undergoing testing. What I'm interested, though, is that the current acceleration of the Chinese Navy and the advances that are happening regarding artificial intelligence, both in the civilian realm and in the military realm. So all the ships, drones, submarines that appear in my novel, they're real. For example, there's a ship that's in my book, and it's based on a real ship. It's called remember the name of it? It's the Zhuhai Yun. It's a real boat produced by the Chinese Navy. It's totally autonomous. It's a boat that basically runs by itself, operates by itself, launches unmanned underwater vehicles that operate by themselves. They release smart torpedoes that can target enemies and operate independently of any type of human interaction. And it sounds like it's future science, but basically they're undergoing sea trials right now in the Taiwan Strait, testing these types of AI-run vehicles. So to me, I just want to try to, in my book, make it dramatic, but at the same time say, hey, look what's going on. Maybe we need to catch up. Maybe we need to think, is this good? Is this bad? How can we counteract it? What is our military doing in regards to this? So those are some topics I'd like to raise in my novel.
Jim, do you think it's justified for people to be so concerned about artificial intelligence? I mean, look at the writers and talent strike in Hollywood, for example. They want to work out an agreement to minimize AI. A lot of people are concerned about this. Driverless trucks, driverless cars. There was a story that we just had yesterday that near San Francisco, 10 robo-taxis without drivers all stopped at the same time and blocked traffic for God knows how long.
Again, being a science thriller, I've done, dangers of AI type of thrillers. But at the same time, let's talk about ChatGPT. It came onto the scene about 2 years ago, and I'm a little bit sort of shocked at how quickly it sort of became utilized by the public. Kids were using it to write their term papers.
Oh, yeah.
Scientists were doing that to do their research. They're using it to basically as a major tool. It only came onto the world's stage about 2 years ago. So I'm, again, as a scientist, thinking, what's that going to look like 10 years from down the line? But saying that, a friend of mine in Boston asked ChatGPT will write a story in the James Rollins type of style of an attack on a mountaintop. And it produced a little story, and that guy sent that to me, and I read it. And yes, I can see, I can see some James Rollins-esque elements to that, but it's a very flat, it's very tonally dead. It's just not, it's not logical. So we're not quite there. I don't think we have to be that frightened with what's going on. I have a lot of art in my books, including this book. And sometimes I will use some of the AI generating art programs to produce some of my art for me. And it's somewhat dumb. I'll ask it to do something, and it's not very good at it. So one part of me says, be scared, but the other part of me is, there's a lot of dumb AI out there right now.
Do you see the justification, though, behind those people who are afraid of it?
Yes, because I'm always extrapolating. 2 years ago, ChatGPT wasn't here. Now, the American Booksellers Association, the actors group, the writers groups, they're all, Authors Guild, we're all trying to address what it's going to look like in the future. because if it's this good already, what might it look like 10, 15 years from now? So I don't know.
I wanted to point out a similarity, which you were ahead of your time because you wrote it in the book, even though the book wasn't published. You wrote it in the book before the actual event occurred, but a implosion of that submersible going down to see the Titanic. You wrote about in your book about a submersible that implodes as well.
Yeah, it was creepily
predictive.
It freaked me out a little bit because of I described that underwater sea research station, and I called it the Titan complex, and that the submersible that imploded was called the Titan. That submersible that imploded was basically designed by a billionaire doing his own sort of scientific research and exploration. In my book, it's a billionaire who builds this entire complex, and in my book, of course, there's a submersible that does implode. So when that came out, it was just like, well, that's eerily, the name, the fact that it's run by a billionaire, the fact that it's this submersible implodes, it just seemed like it was like echoing just what I just had written.
Are you clairvoyant?
I don't think so. What I think it is that when I do my research for my books, I love talking to scientists. I don't want to just read their research articles, though I do, or read their books and try to dig out little facts. I love to talk to them because it takes me a while to write a book. From the time I get the idea, I do my research, I write the book, it gets published, then it comes a year later, it comes out. Science can change very rapidly. And my secret fear is that I'm going to write something scientific in my book, but by the time my book comes out, that's going to be proven wrong. So I love to go to the horse's mouth, so to speak. I'll talk to the scientist and say, hey, don't tell me what you're writing in your next research paper. Look over your shoulder. What's on your work table? I need that immediacy. And I think because I incorporate that what's coming down the pike, so when I put it in a book and somebody reads it, and then that research that they're working on comes to light, all of a sudden it's like, oh, Jim's clairvoyant. No, I think it's just because I'm getting information a little bit in advance of what's happening out there.
We're talking with best-selling author James Rollins. His website is his name, James Rollins, ROLLINS.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. His latest book is called Tides of Fire, which is available, I assume, all over the place, James?
It is available everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you have independent bookstores. It's out there.
You touch upon the Chinese and its efforts to reach the moon. Tell us about that.
That is, again, a current topic. We're seeing that sort of a version of the space race going on. I was just reading this week that the Russians are trying to launch a manned operation to the moon. China's doing the same. We're doing the same. So there's all sort of a new space race for the moon. But in doing this novel, because some of what I learned in this novel is tied to the moon, is there's something really odd that happened in 2020. China launched a lunar lander, the Chang'e 5 lunar lander, and it landed in an old lava plain on the moon's northern edge. And the lander drilled into this volcanic plain and ended up bringing home about 2 kilograms of lunar basalt. It was the first lunar landing to sample the moon in over 45 years. Now, the purpose of this mission was to better understand the moon's evolution. How did it form? How long? What time frame did it take to sort of coalesce and become our satellite? Then something happened that was strange. The lunar lander's drill mysteriously broke down while trying to dig into a stratum that just didn't make any sense to the scientists at that time. And those lunar rocks that they recovered show that the moon's formation, its core cooled far slower than anyone previously believed. And the reason for this still baffles scientists. They're still debating, why did the moon coalesce slower than it was expected? Now, in my book, I have my own theory, which is based on science. It's based on another strange detail about the moon's formation, a detail that affects us today on Earth and could threaten us in the future.
Do you think the moon was part of Earth or someplace else?
Well, the current consensus is that 4 billion years ago, a planetoid called Theia crashed into the Earth, threw off a chunk of the Earth's mass, and then it coalesced in an orbit around our planet, became our moon. Now, what I discovered when I was doing my research on this novel is that scientists have discovered that underneath the crust underneath Africa and also in the Pacific are these strange regions, these strange masses that are lurking underneath the crust. They call them large, low-velocity provinces, but the scientists sort of just call them blobs. They're basically they're huge. They're about the size of a continent. They're 100 times taller than Mount Everest.
Wow.
And scientists are now believe that these blobs are actually pieces of that ancient planetoid that struck the Earth and became trapped in our mantle. Now, these planetoid blobs are not inert. They're like splinters under the skin. They have been a great source of tectonic instability. They've caused massive quakes. They cause a lot of volcanic activity. Now, most people are familiar with the Ring of Fire. It's this band of volcanoes that wraps around the Pacific. Major source of earthquakes, but 75% of the Earth's quakes occur in Southeast Asia, and it occurs where one of those blobs meets that area. And now scientists believe that it's one of those blobs underneath Africa that triggered the Great Dying at the end of the Permian period, an extinction-level event that wiped out most life on the planet. Now, I talked to a scientist at the University of Oslo who's been doing research on these blobs, and he's basically told me, which I think is a cool term, he says, we're all sitting atop an antediluvian time bomb. That event that occurred in the Permian period can at any point repeat. So, of course, me being a thriller writer, I'm going to show you what that looks like in novel format, if something like that should have, possibly happen again.
You write about some fascinating things in the deep sea. Tell me about that.
That's my avid scuba diving background. I've always been interested in the topic and the ingenious ways various animals adapt to living in the deepest trenches. And so much still remains unknown. That's this common number they put out there is that 20% of the ocean floor has been crudely mapped. But we're talking about just rough mapping. If you're talking about like fine granular detail of what that seabed looks like, enough to spot a plane wreck, like no one's ever found that Malaysian plane that crashed. When you're looking at that fine level of detail, the number drops down to 0.05% of the ocean bed has been mapped to that level of degree. So there's so much that remains unknown, unexplored. Giant squids were once considered mythical until they end up washing on beaches. In my book, I talk to marine biologists, I talk to different type of oceanographers, scientists, and challenge them, what aren't we seeing? What's down there deeper? What might that look like? And that's what I sort of, what they told me is what I put up in the book, and hopefully down the line, somebody will find something they find in my book and go, hey, Jim's clairvoyant. Nope, I would just talk to scientists.
That's fascinating work. And you talk about the coral features in the book, too. Are they dying?
Basically, there's definitely a change in water temperature that's causing some bleaching. We're seeing that happen first in Australia, but now we're seeing that, we're having 100-degree ocean temperatures off of Florida. We're seeing corals dying. There's people right now that are actually collecting coral off the coast of Florida, trying to keep them from, they're basically bringing them indoors, putting them in aquariums to try to save them during this heat wave that's occurring down there. But coral is amazing. Coral has been continuously growing in the Mediterranean Sea for 400,000 years. What's weird is that the appearance of coral in the history of the Earth was relatively short and it's poorly understood. Scientists are still sort of baffled why coral happened. It's a strange mixture of these little polyps living in these sort of stony skeletons, and they're not quite sure where they came from and why they're there. And the distribution in the current oceans is divided between shallow coral and deep sea coral. Shallow coral gets a lot of its energy from sunlight that's still able to reach the coral, so they have some photosynthesis that occurs that sort of keeps them going. But down deep, there's no sunlight. And so they had to develop a new strategy to survive. And so I asked one biologist, what about down deeper? How deep can coral go? And what's the extreme pressures that coral can survive? Right. And his answer was, there's no limit. There's probably coral that we have not identified yet, in that 80%, 90% of the ocean that we've not seen. And then I asked him, what if there was coral growing there down deep? What might that look like? How would those corals survive under that high pressure? And what he told me is what appears in this book. There's some exciting science, there's pictures, there's drawings I put in the book, exactly what that might look like.
You raise in the book some very strange theories about octopuses and their ties to extraterrestrial life.
Hey, they're not strange. I may raise a few eyebrows, but it's basically based on real science. There was a peer-reviewed research paper upon that aspect of the book, because basically what you're going to discover my book is that octopuses, we already know, have a unique and baffling biology. They have astounding intelligence. They're empathic to other creatures, but their evolutionary pathway is still challenging. There was a research paper that was written by a team of astrobiologists called "The Cause of Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic," and they theorized that octopuses could have evolved from cosmic seeding of our planet by extraterrestrial retroviruses during meteor impacts. When this paper came out, it was met with some skepticism. Octopuses from space was the big headlines, but this paper survived vigorous review. I read it. I have a background in evolutionary science. I have a background in veterinary medicine. And, I read it, and it's shockingly serious. It's articulate. It builds a strong factual basis for that possibility. So in this book, we explore that. Could octopuses actually have a different evolutionary pathway than most life on this planet?
You touch upon UFOs in the book. Tell me about that. I
do. I've always been fascinated by that subject matter, and it sort of dovetails into this whole idea of these volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, because what I've found when doing my research on UFOs or UAPs, which I find, let's be serious, that UFOs and UAPs are the same thing. I just think that UFOs got so vilified. Now they just call them UAPs.
Yeah.
It's a shame, because basically they're unidentified flying objects.
They're still UFOs to me.
Exactly. And but one of the major sites where UFOs appear is around volcanic activity. Strange lights, seeing craft going in and out of volcanoes. So again, this sort of dovetails into my research on doing this. And I'm always curious, to me, I'm slightly suspicious when it comes to governments. One of the reasons I wanted to write this novel is something that sort of occurred in my head. Is that we see, recently, a sudden and fairly dramatic releasing of information being leaked to the public. We have the release of the CIA declassified nearly 3,000 pages of documents known as the Black Vault. The Pentagon produced an unclassified report regarding 144 UAPs that were picked up by military personnel, and only one had an explainable origin, a deflated balloon, but the other 143 had no explanation. The Pentagon started a new outfit that many people are aware of. It's called the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. A tongue-tied, long name, basically saying, yeah, we're sort of suspicious of that too. And then, of course, we had the recent testimony with David Grush about the possibility that
and the other two,
there's non-human biologics that were picked up by alleged craft recoveries. So I got to thinking, as a skeptic that I am, skeptic, but suspicious as I am, that why is this information coming out so rapidly and so suddenly? I got to think, are these releases leading up to something? Is the government preparing us something step by step, softening the blow, so to speak, to release some astounding news down the line? I have a circle of contacts, as you might imagine.
Absolutely.
Sigma Force is DARPA. They work through DARPA. So I have a bunch of contacts with DARPA. I've got contacts with the Pentagon because I write these military thrillers, and I've been on Air Force One. So I have all these contacts, and so I thought, I'm going to investigate this. I'm going to call these people up and ask them. I'm going to challenge them. What's really going on? Why is this information being released? Now, these people have generally been very open with me to a shocking degree. Sometimes, I don't know if you should be telling me that. But when it came to this topic, they were strangely evasive. So I was like, that's what aren't they telling me? If they're so honest about this, then they should just tell me, no, this is not real. But they did not do that. They were evasive about it. So that makes me think there's something that still hasn't been released. Now, I don't know if they're just doing systematically so that we don't get culture shock from some major revelation that's occurring, whether they're sort of leading us up to something that's not going to totally derail the human species with the information that's being released.
I knew the late Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, James, and he told me we were being visited, we have been visited, and the government knows about it.
I do not doubt that at all. I believe David Grush. He's got the credentials. He was asked in 2019 to head a government task force to specifically look into UAPs. He was assigned that. He had access to the National Reconnaissance Office that has all these U.S. spy satellites. So he's not, he's not a wacko. He's basically, if you listen to his testimony, he sounds very lucid. He's believable. I think what supports is the fact that there's a sort of a smear campaign going on against him right now. That makes me even more suspicious that they're covering things up, because why go after this guy in that regard unless they're really trying to crush something? Maybe he's stepping. I mentioned before they're taking a step by step to this point. Maybe they're thinking, well, you're taking us too fast in that direction. Let's pull you back, and so we're going to smear you. And it wasn't just him. I would listen to the whole Pentagon testimony by him. It wasn't just him. It was also the Navy fighter pilot.
The other two, Graves and Fedor.
Brian Graves and David Fravor.
Fravor, yeah.
Graves reported that he was flying off the coast of the Virginia Beach in 2014 in an F-18, and he came upon something that, as he described, as a dark gray or black cube inside a clear sphere, and he estimated it's like 15 feet in diameter, and unlike any aircraft he's seen. These are not. You're putting yourself in the line to come out there and say that. You're putting your career in your line. So why would they do that unless there is some basis for that?
And he's not lying before Congress, because that's a legal offense.
Exactly. It's a testimony. I mean, basically, you're putting your hand, up and you're swearing. This is what's happened. And I like Graves. Graves, I was actually impressed by his testimony. He basically is very practical. Says, I urge you to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issues on this topic. If they are foreign drones, that's an urgent national security problem. If it's not, that's an issue for science to better investigate it.
That's right.
The American people deserve to know what's happening.
They've all seemed a little concerned about safety. And my take is, if these are extraterrestrial, and they probably are, they would have annihilated us years ago. That something would have happened. I don't think they're here to hurt us, Jim.
No, at this point, I mean, if they the current sort of way people say, well, it can't possibly be an extraterrestrial, is that if you had the technology to travel to the U.S. to the planet Earth, you would reveal yourself, you would take over. But I think they're here for a reason. I'm not sure what that reason is, but I don't think it's malevolent. If it was malevolent, they would have acted already.
See, maybe they seeded us.
If they were here, you got to basically go. If they are here, which I accept, if they got here, then if they had the technology to do that, they would have the technology to wipe us out.
Absolutely.
And they have not done that.
And what if they seeded us?
Had the technology, then I have to assume that there's some type of benevolence going on.
And again, what if they seeded us and they just want to monitor us? That's,
oddly enough, is the basis of this book. There's a reason those UFOs are circling around those volcanic sites. At one point, the characters say, they've seeded a garden. Now they've come to see how things are going.
Yep.
One of the characters says, well, hopefully it's not harvest season. But I don't believe actually that there would be that situation. But I believe that they could very well be monitoring something that they've started here.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.